Hey guys, so this video is going to go over how we can take our websites and take it to the next level and make it more responsive. So there's a couple things that we can do to make our website responsive, and it's going to probably have to deal with reformatting some code to make sure that we can use it. The first thing that we want to do is inside our head. And I have W3 schools opened up as a reference, but we need to be able to capture the viewport or the screen width of any device that we're attaching. So this meta tag right here needs to go inside the head. So I have an Atom project open that's very simple right now. This is what it looks like. Let me put the screens over the side. I just have it identified as header, navigation, main, aside, and footer. Inside the head, though, is where we want to add our viewport. So that's all that it is for being able to capture the viewport of any screen that we need. We can pull the width, and then we give it an initial scale of 1. So everything that we see or that we're designing towards is going to take up 100% of that screen. Okay. So that's the first part, being able to capture this screen width. The second part is that we can design using CSS Grid. Now, CSS Grid came out 2011. If I use the website caniuse.com and I do a search for Grid, it's currently used by almost 94% of the global community. And if you look at what browsers are not supporting CSS Grid, it's either stuff that was out before Grid became mainstream and are not really supported much anymore. So like Firefox 40 through Firefox 51, we're only looking at 0.16% of the global community for that version. Internet Explorer, it has partial support, but it is not used by a lot of the community except for Internet Explorer 11. They still have to update some stuff. Most of the usage comes from Firefox, Edge, Chrome, Safari, and Opera, and iOS Safari. And all of those, the newest releases that are currently being used, are supportive of Grid. Okay, so using that, I have a simple page and I'm using semantic elements to identify my page. So all of these we're going to go ahead and design. So what I have, just so we can get our feet off the ground and running, I have a CSS style sheet, and all I have is that I'm aligning the center of the text. I'm putting a border around all of the direct children of body, and I'm giving it an initial height of 300 pixels. And then I have separate classes for different background colors so you can see the change in the elements. Okay, so let's go ahead and comment out that. We save, refresh. Okay, so this is what we're looking at. These are all header, nav, main, aside, and footer are all block elements, so they will stack right on top of each other. And if we look, this is, in essence, this is a cell phone style design, but we're going to go one more step above that. Okay, so the magic doesn't happen in the HTML other than any CSS grid. And when we're looking at, again, you could refer to W3 schools. Any grid that you're trying to build, like something like this, where I wanted the head to be on the very top, navigation to be on the far, left, the main section area, maybe an aside and a footer, any of that only works when you build a container that is holding all the grid items. So the grid is the container, and then all the direct children are the grid items. Okay, so if I'm looking at how I'm going to build this, my body has direct children for header, navigation, main, aside, and footer. Okay, so playing around with that, if I wanted to be able to reconfigure how I am doing my layout for those children element of body, I'm going to be playing around in CSS. So to start off, we have to define the grid container. So either I could use a class to do this, or I could do specifically the actual element. So in this case, I'm just going to use body, but I'm going to say body, and I need to say that it's a grid. And again, all this stuff is in W3 Schools in the layout for being able to do this. Okay, I also need to give it its width. So I could say it's 100% of the screen. And that is, for the most part, that's all that we need to do to actually get a grid set up. But you're going to see that we have no changes. Okay, it will resize, but that's what was happening beforehand. What we need to do is we need to look at a couple more pieces. So the easiest way to get your grid up and running is that we need to tag a name for every element that is that direct child of body. So I'm going to say header, and then I can call it grid area, and I give it a name. And in this case, it's going to feel redundant, but it's necessary. Header main, grid area main, nav, grid area nav, aside, grid area aside, and footer, grid area footer. Okay, so once we have that, we can actually start thinking about our layout. So I have tagged every one of my elements that are direct children of the body. Now we can go into the body and we can decide what type of layout. So I'm going to start kind of top down. So say, desktop all the way down to tablet for now. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to define what our columns are. So grid template columns. And I can say what my layout is. In this case, I want my main in the center. I kind of want a simple 3 column layout. I want my center to the main that's going to be in the center to grow greater than the sides. So I can do, and there are a lot of different measurements that we can use. We could use M's, percentages, vertical width, relative vertical width, pixels, all of these, but grid actually has fractional units also. So I can choose which one would work best for me. So using fractional units, though, I can say that I have a fraction. I'm breaking my page up into 4 columns, and the 2 columns, those are going to grow basically at a greater rate than the columns that are only taking up 1 fractional unit. So that's all I really need to set up the columns, but then I need to set up my grid template areas. And now that I actually put those tags for all those elements, I can actually use that to lay out my page. So for each row, you need to put it inside of quotes. So if I have 3 rows, I'm going to have 3 quotes. Okay. And I usually just do a line break after grid so that I can have them lined up so I can see them and they're easy to read. So if we want our header to cross the entire area, then I have 3 columns. One is, the middle one takes 2 fractional units, but all I have to do is just put header for each one of those columns, and it's going to stretch the entire way. And then I can say I want my navigation on the left-hand side, I want my main in the center, and that aside on the far right. And then on my bottom, I want footer, footer, and footer. Okay. And then I finish off with a semicolon, and that's it. That's my grid. Let's go ahead and refresh. And there we go. This is a grid that is responsive, and as I drag it, notice how the main is growing at a greater rate than navigation and aside. Now I can lock in certain sizes and have it where certain things are going to be inflexible. Say that first one, maybe I only want it to be 200 pixels. That's okay too. And then that will lock in the size, and my main will still grow and the aside will still grow, but my main is still growing at a greater rate because it's 2 FR instead of 1 FR. So that in essence, I have a simple 3-column web page set up with very little work or overhead on setting this up. Okay, now for us to make our pages responsive, so if I was dragging this down, I mean it's able to grow with us, but I start dragging down, my navigation main and aside are taking up more real estate than what they should. So I really should be looking at redesigning maybe to a 2-column web page and then eventually to a 1-column. When I get down to, say, cell phone size, it would not be advantageous for the user to have to try to navigate and use their thumbs to click on anything with stuff this small. So I do want to kind of reconfigure. So that is where media queries come in. So in W3 Schools, there is good write-ups on what media queries are, and we can use them for being able to tag screens, or if we wanted, if they try to print the page for it to print a specific way, we can target the widths, like max widths and min widths, for it to reconfigure. So instead of us having to have multiple style sheets, we can have one style sheet that is reconstructed based off of what our needs are. Okay, and all we have to use is this app media, and then we're determining what media type we're using and then what media features. So I'm just going to use it for max and min widths and the screen, but I would check in here and do a little bit of research if you wanted a specific layout for whether you're in portrait or landscape mode. You can even check if a device actually has a specific screen width or density of pixels, and can use this to your advantage. Okay, so to plug this in, it's really easy. This is our format that we're doing. So at the very bottom, I usually keep all my media queries at the very bottom, and I'm just going to do my media query. So since I'm only targeting the screen, and I want, let's say, my max width, because I want, when I shrink my screen down, let's say to 800 pixels, and this is the only time when you're using media queries that you're going to want to, in responsive design, that you're going to want to hard code with pixels. Using your fonts where they're taking consideration they're being used as M's allows the user to be able to resize their page, to resize their fonts, and you can have a dynamic page that's being responsive to that if they want larger or smaller text. Okay, but for us to be able to target media queries, actually screen widths, we need to put a hard code of pixels. So I'm doing max width. I'm going to say 800 pixels. And what I need to target, these don't need to change. Those are set as what I want. I need to target what I want to change. So if I want to go to a 2-column web page, I could still use the grid, and I can make a couple changes. So in this, I'm going to, and let's just go ahead and copy this to be more expedient on time. I only need to make changes to the stuff that I want to be different. Okay, so when I'm using the media query, unless I override it in the media query, it will take the initial value that it has. So this is kind of like a checkbox. Once I have a width that is 800 pixels or less, then anything that is in here that is different than what is in my original CSS will be what is taken. It's going to be it's going to override whatever my previous values are. So an example of this, let's leave, we can comment all of this out just so you can see. I'm going to comment that out, and I could say I want a width of, just so you can instantly see it, I want a width of 50%. So even though my container, my body, is still holding a grid, it is going to actually shrink to 50% of the screen. So let's go ahead and look at that so we can see what it will look like. So when I drag this down and I get to that, see how it's only taking up 50% of the screen? Okay, so you can see that it's actually picking up and detecting that screen width, but we do want to do a better design than that. So let's go ahead and make those changes. Now, generally what I find is, since we're dealing with, say, tablets, we want to have a little bit of buffer from the edge of the screen. So I usually put that down to, let's say, like a width of 90%. And then my margins, if I wanted to center that, I can go margins auto, and that will automatically center in my screen. So let's go ahead and save that, and you can see it run. So when I get down, it's snapping, and I have a little bit of space on the right and left hand side. Okay, so now we can go ahead and redesign. We want a 2-column width, so let's take off one of our fractional units, and then we just need to reconfigure. So let's say that I want the header to still span. I want the navigation and then the main to take up a row. I want the aside to take up a whole row, and the footer to take up a whole row. So just doing that, I mean, it seems really simple, but grids are amazing. Okay, so I resize, and bam, now I have, it's only taking up 90%, so I have a little bit of padding or margin on the right and left, and now I'm at a 2-column grid, and the main is still going to grow and shrink at an exponential rate compared to navigation. Now when I get too small, so let's copy this again, the entire media query, and we need to reconfigure for when we're looking at cell phone size. So let's do a width of 500 pixels, and we still want to keep this margin in the auto, so we don't need to mention anything. We could leave it like that. I could have it in here, or I can completely delete it, because it is going to, that's why it's cascading style sheets. This is what is being followed, so unless I change it, that's what's going to be adopted. I'm going to change my column to 1 fractional unit, and let's reconfigure. So I want the header at the top, then I want my nav, then I want my main, then I want my aside, and then I want my footer. So okay, so for screen width of 500 pixels, now I have a single layout for my page. I can refresh, and let's go ahead and shrink it down and snap. There, it's now reconfigured for a single column page for cell phone size. Now you can say, well, okay, I'm going down to cell phone size, I need to kind of think of navigation more than a header. Well, that is as simple as just reorganizing the order. So I can do that, resave this, refresh, and my order switches. Okay, doing a responsive layout really takes more thought on what you want to do for the layout than doing it in code. When you use tools like Grid and media queries, and you make sure that you're holding the meta tag for the screen width. So this was very little code for us to make a responsive design for 3 column to 2 column to 1 column based off of screen sizes. Now, grids are not just for the top design. In my main, I could have multiple columns, and I could configure that itself. The main could become a container of direct children of the main, could have that. Now, if I wanted to make some changes, so you're saying, Mr. Walters, well, what if I wanted header and navigation to be all one compared to all the others? Well, then all you have to do is you just have to put a container, and this is where divs are actually useful. Because they are not semantic elements, I can use that to group elements together that I need to work for design. So if my header and navigation, if I want them to be one thing in terms of the container that's holding it for grid, then all I have to do is just create that div class. And so I'm going to rename this to blue, and then take it off of my header. So if I save this and I refresh, okay, it reconfigured. Now navigation I have as orange, but this is no longer a direct child of the body. Now the div class is actually the direct child of the body. So if I was to do something like that, I'm going to have to reconfigure, because as I resize, that is breaking because the header, there's no data saying how long that should go. So I should, if I was going to do this, I would probably use that class blue, give it a different name of grid area for that specific class, and I can have it stretch again. Having it like this, nav is not identified anymore, either is the header, because now it's all inside that div. So it's a couple different ways that you can use it to restructure your pages, have a good layout, be responsive, considering the user experience as they're using your pages. All right, it's just as simple as using grid and media queries. So go ahead and check out W3 Schools, play around with the design. There's so much more that we could do with grid, having it auto do layout for pictures and stuff. We can have it actually plan out how many columns it's going to do based off of actual image size and stuff like that. So have fun, good luck, may the odds ever be in your favor.